Hey everyone, I wanted to go through the first appendix a little bit on time management and a little bit about career management. I'm going to skip the etiquette parts. I think it's kind of redundant for graduate students, but um, okay. It would seem that we should probably all be great at time management at this point. We all have very busy lives. We all do lots of things, and I think that what you find is that that is not necessarily the case, even with extremely bright people who have had lots of experience in professional careers, that somehow they lose control of their time, which tends to be one of our most valuable assets. So I would say that, let's see what they have here. Managing your time effectively gives you more time, develops better skills. Time management skills do better at balancing work and life. Well, that's another thing, is that we're all challenged to sort of between work-life choices that we've constantly got to make. They have less stress if they're a little bit more time organized, which is true. They are more productive typically. Take control of your life. Don't let it rule you. Rule it. Keep a log. Now, the book has given a couple different logs, and I want to talk about that. The log is not a bad thing. I don't think it's a bad thing to try. It is. It creates a bit of overhead to your day because they're suggesting that you write things down in 15-minute increments. Just the coding of that takes a fair amount of time. Some people very disciplined, and that's easy for them to do. Some people, this becomes a crisis. All right. I would say, at some level, whether it is the 15-minute increment or whether it is just taking an hour at the end of the day and thinking to yourself, what is it that I really did today? And where did I spend my time? If you do it by the 15 minutes, I think you'll be terribly surprised, because even if you get to the end of the day and you look back at the day, very often you don't remember where you spent your time. I would say even at a week, though, it becomes important. I'm going to just drag something onto the screen here. One of the things that I personally did, I worked for a company that was an Inc. 500 company. Now, if you guys don't remember what that is, Inc. 500 companies are the 500 fastest growing privately held companies in the U.S. And I was in a top 50. I was in the most profitable division of a top 50 Inc. 500 company. The guy who owned the company was an interesting character. He was another doctor. He had a PhD. Very, very bright guy, and very organized. And I was a very young man at the time. I was in my 20s at the time. And he took me aside, and he said to me, look, 20s or 30s, anyway, I was young. He took me aside and he said, look, I need you to do this for me. We would have weekly one-on-ones. And the first thing that I would have to do is I would have to start the meeting with this list. And this list would be the week of, and I'd have to bring this week's and last week's with me. So what did I say I was going to do last week? What did I actually do? What were the major accomplishments that I did the week before? This is a Monday morning meeting, by the way. What was the accomplishments I did the week before? And then what was my plan for the current week? And I would have to justify these things. And you would think that I said I was going to do this, and I probably did that. Well, more often than not, I would look back at the week and realize that those major things that I said I really should be doing this week were not the things that actually got done. Sometimes it was because a crisis came up and it just sucked up a lot of my time. Other times it's because I chose poorly. And this is not an uncommon thing. When you take a look at however you track your time, you may begin to realize that very often you're choosing poorly. That you could justify at the moment, this is why I did this, but when you step back and you say, was that the best way for me to invest this valuable asset, my time, you'll very often come to the conclusion that it may not have been the best way to do that. So I just thought I would throw that one in there. because those are the first things that you do when you start. If you step back and you take a look at this log, and you're going to say, where did I spend my time? How much time did I spend on my primary responsibilities, things I was really supposed to do? Identify places where you spent too much time. So maybe it was an important thing for you to do, but if you had a list of 5 really important things to do, maybe you spent too much time on a lower priority thing where you should have spent that time on a higher priority thing. Identify places where you are not spending enough time. Identify the major interruptions. Identify the things that you're not doing that you need to do and need to be involved in. And also the things that you can delegate. Now, one of the, so after I was working for that Inc. 500 company, I worked for another company that was growing extremely fast. We went from, I was the 5th employee, and inside of 6 years, we went from 5 employees to 750 and had offices on 4 continents. Now, one of the things that my boss there taught me was that every week, because we were growing so quickly, I had to step back and decide what things I should no longer be doing, which is kind of an interesting problem, right? Because in the beginning, when we were relatively small, you could do everything, and you did everything. As time went on, I had to sit there and prioritize, because, when we were 10 people, I could spend time doing this. When we hit 50 people, wow, that task should not be where I'm focusing my skills. It's not the best use of my time and efforts. I should be delegating that to someone else and moving on to those things that are most important. So I think that's a big problem, identifying the things that you should not be doing. And it's not maybe because you don't like them. There's plenty of things that we do in life that we don't like, that we should be doing. Like taxes are one of them, right? So there's plenty of things that you should be doing that you should spend time on that you may not like. So this is not what you prefer. This is if you were having a very cold-blooded, calculated assessment, third-party assessment of you as an asset for the organization, or for yourself if you work for yourself. You as an asset, where are you most useful? And particularly with business owners, this becomes a problem because you want to get involved with everything, right? If you're a small business, you want to be involved with everything, and you've got to sometimes step back and say, I should not be doing that, right? I should let some. And what's even harder is sometimes you think you're the best person for that particular job, that no one else can do it as good as you. But is it the highest and best use of your time? If it's not, hand it off. And you do this in your personal life as well. I remember when I got to a certain point in my career, I had a house in the suburbs and I had a nice yard, and I was cutting the lawn, but I was traveling 4 days a week on the road, and I had a wife and 3 kids. So I realized that one of the things that I just had to delegate was mowing the lawn. It sounds stupid and simple, right? But I spent hours each weekend mowing the lawn and felt bad when I didn't get to it, where I should have been spending that time with my kids, where I should have been spending that time with my wife, where I should be going to a Little League game or to a family function instead of going out there and cutting the grass. So I was fortunately to have enough means to do that, and I said, yes, that is not the highest and best use of my time. I know it's a trite example, but it's an example nonetheless that I think many of us can relate to. So where are you not giving yourself the highest and best use of your time? So who controls your time? Is it yourself or your boss? Or is it other employees? Is it outside people? Which helps you kind of figure out how you can prioritize certain things you may not be able to prioritize or may not have any control over. How can you take more control would be the question. Look for crisis situations. A number of times I've been involved in crisis situations, and it was in business, and sometimes you begin to realize after you've seen something that maybe this was just poor planning. Maybe I have this crisis on a regular basis because I'm not planning, or I'm not investing enough time up front so that I don't have this crisis at the end. And so you begin to identify those certain things where you can spot patterns and tendencies, and how you're handling things, and you can list those things which are really your big time wasters. What are the big things that are killing you right now? Determine how you can manage your time more effectively. Okay, and setting your priorities. All right, as we're getting into this part here, I think there's a couple of other things I want to touch on. Let's see. The first is, so you can have to-do lists. In fact, let me come back to that. I think there's going to be a place for this. So, setting your priorities. Best way to avoid overloading yourself. First of all, multitasking is a myth. I know you think you can do multiple things at the same time. You can't. What you end up doing is quickly switching from one task to another, and that can be okay. But very often, particularly if it's a task that requires any sort of conscious effort, that creates an additional overhead and actually creates more of a problem than it is. So where you can, and I'm not saying this is always possible, but where you can, try to focus on a single thing at a time. Sounds easy, it's not easy. But sometimes if you can do that, but identify in your own mind that maybe you've got too much multitasking going on. Sometimes if you're trying to multitask, the individual things you're multitasking actually take longer because the switching requires a little more mental overhead and slows down the process. If you just were able to identify places and times where you could do those things separately, you could maybe do each one of them more efficiently and better. Okay. Okay, so the to-do list things. Simple to-do lists are great. And a lot of people have those. It could be a simple paper to-do list, right? And a lot of people work on those. And realizing that this may be a wish list that you're trying to get done today, but at least it gives you some point of focus. Now, there are more elaborate types of to-do lists. Okay, for those of you who are into technology, one of the most popular ones out there today is this thing called Trello. Trello is a free app. There's a paid version of it, but it's essentially a free app where you can, it's a Kanban system. And this is actually goes back to, it's a Japanese management thing, where Kanban systems, originally were paper. And you would take a card and you would write the task on the front of the card. On the back of the card, you'd have more information like a description, who else is involved, any notes on the thing. And essentially, you can do the same thing with Trello. And I have here just some Trello templates. And just like you have a PowerPoint template, you can have a Trello template. It's pretty open, but the basic concept is a task, like legal review here, has a card. Okay, and on that card, I could have a due date. And I could also assign people to work on that task. I could create a color for it that gives me an idea of a priority or a project that it might be part of. Within the card, I could have a series of sub-to-dos, like a checklist inside of there that could be on there. I could have notes attached to it. I can have files attached to it. So there's all sorts of things. And then each one of these columns, I could just drag a card from one to the other. So I have this list of things I've got to do, and I could just drag this one into pending, or I can drag this one into this is currently blocked and I'm waiting for one, and I can drag this one into something else. That's one way of looking at it. You can have a very simple project manager where you're brainstorming ideas, you get a list of to-dos, you say I'm doing this and these are the things I've done. You can just, once you finish the card, you just drag it into the done column, right? Let's see, what else did I have over here? Oh, this is just another software thing. Now, we talked about tracking time. There are time card systems that are out there that can help you, that are automatically start timing you and prompt you. And this is Time Slips, which is probably the oldest one out there. It's been around for decades. And you can just quickly add time. So this is a lot of times when people are professionals that are doing some sort of professional services. So if you're an accountant, if you're a lawyer, if you're a consultant, these sort of time tracking systems are in place. You could do that for your own stuff, but it's also good if you're trying to bill, right? All right. Other things, all right, would be something like Microsoft Project, right, or any sort of Gantt chart system. I think of Library Gantt or Library Project, which is another one that's free. And in these systems, what you do is you have tasks that are running down on the left side there, and then the calendar goes across the page here, and each one of those bars is just an identification of a task on the calendar, and where it's with a little arrow connecting there is just connecting that one task to another. This one has to be finished before I can start this one. And when I've got the sort of color-coded sections in the center here, right over here, this is saying that all of the things under the green are part of design, or all of the things under the orange are part of development, right? And so you can have one task depend upon another, and you can assign people to tasks, and you can say how much of the task is done, and you can have reports that gets generated out of here that shows you how many hours each person spent on what task. So it's another time tracking system. It also sets priorities for you. And I've included in the course files, I've included a video here by John Doerr. So John Doerr is from Kleiner Perkins, one of the very high-end venture capital firms in Silicon Valley. He sort of helped fund little companies like Google or Quicken and people like that. So John Doerr talks about when he worked for Andy Grove at Intel and how this is a TED talk that he does about how he successfully set goals. Now, this is what they call an OKR system, which is also something you can do in Trello. Okay, where you say, here's my big goal, right? And my big objective. So that's the O and the OKR. Here's my big objective, and here are the key results that I need to achieve in order to reach that objective. And you can sort of list them in order, or you can just list them as, being important to be done before that we reach this final goal. So, and I'll give you a personal example. You can be a business example, like we want to be the premier product or the leading product with the most market share for this particular industry and this particular segment, right? You could be that our goal is to create efficiency in our European operations, to be the most efficient company as far as travel and distribution. So you can have these goals, right? I'll give you a personal example. So one of my goals 6 years ago, I guess about 6 years ago now, maybe 7, I decided I wanted to become a significantly good offshore sailor. And so I had never sailed before. So the first thing, so that's my key objective, would be to be a high-end recreational sailor. And so I been on a couple of sailboats, crewed for a couple of people for very little things, but really didn't know how to do it, right? So first key result, in order to be a good offshore sailor, you need a boat. I didn't have one. So got a small starter boat. Second key result, get a coach. So just so happens that I know a guy who used to teach offshore navigation to the U.S. sailing team. He's a pretty high-end coach. He's a friend. So it's like, okay, arrange with Tim to be your coach. So I got my coach. Second, set a goal for a short distance individual sail by myself by this date, right? Next key result. And I kept adding to the length of how far I was going out and how long I was staying. Okay, do the first overnight where you drop anchor and stay on anchor. And then, do the first multi-day sail, right? And then I kept adding to that. And then was it October of 2008, I kind of hit a big milestone, which I think brought me into the category I wanted to be in, and that is I sailed with my older brother from Port Jefferson, Long Island, to Bermuda. So an island 700 miles off the coast of the United States, off the coast of South Carolina. So we sailed from Port Jefferson to Bermuda. So 20-foot seas and almost run into cargo ships in the middle of the night. So I really learned a lot from that trip. So I'm pretty confident now. And I got other goals now, I think, to add to that list, the key results in my own mind as to how I'm going to get even better at what I want to do there. So you can set these key results, and I think it also helps direct. It becomes a big directional thing. This is an important thing to me, and therefore it helps me set my priorities. All right, so as it says here, the to-dos need to be personalized. Is it something you can delegate? Great. If it's not, great. Do it yourself. Is it a task that's in your major area of responsibility, right? If it's not in your major area of responsibility, you might consider not doing the job because it might not help you become more effective. How soon does it need to be done? So there are things that are important, and there are things that are critical, and there are things that are unimportant, right? But would be nice to get done. Clearly, you've got to prioritize those things by how important they are. So this just kind of goes to a task of delegating those things, which we just sort of outlined there. Prioritizing your list, and there is some exercises in the book that help you do that. Some experts say that we waste 2 hours a day. I would say it's probably higher than that, right? For a lot of people. And management system in your text provides records. Great. Skip that. Okay. You should have a plan for the week. If you're looking at OKRs, you might say, this is my plan for this quarter, right? This is my plan for the year. This is my plan for the next 5 years. So you could have a longer term plan. But you also need to have the shorter term goals. So what am I trying to do by the end of the month? What am I trying to do by the end of the week? Those kinds of things. Never do an unscheduled task before a scheduled one without prioritizing it first. So, a little soft on that one. There are things that may be important that you have to get done, but you really have to try to hold yourself to your schedule if you can. Otherwise, things begin to slip away. And they're suggesting there's lots of different places you can get stuff to help you keep tracking. Multitasking, we said, is a myth. Okay. We've talked about some time management techniques. All right. As far as your career stages, a lot of pressure. You're getting started in your 20s, of unreal expectations sometimes. I think that one of the things that happens to you in your 20s is you get out of school and you get a couple of quick promotions very often, and you begin to think that you're going to get promoted every 3 months or every 6 months for the rest of your career, and you're going to be president of the company by the time you're 30, and that oftentimes hits someone in their 20s and sometimes becomes an unreal expectation. 30s, you sort of become an expert at certain things, and you sort of start building your momentum in your career. 40s and 50s now are a dangerous area because people can lose their jobs and have to reinvent themselves. And that's sometimes a dangerous thing. In 60s and 70s, you're probably scooting to retirement. One of the things I would say is when you're looking at your career, I think it needs to you sort of need to step back and do some planning and some development. Okay? I don't know that there's any one source for this. One book that I've read, I've given to people in my life, Designing Your Life. It's written by a couple of Stanford professors who talk about how you sort of plan for things in your life and your career. I would also say Clayton Christensen has a book about, I think it's just, how are you going to judge your life? And the point of all these things is it's not just about work. It's about relationships. It's about health. So you look at different aspects of this and say, where am I investing my time? What should I be investing my time in? What would I really want to do if I could sort of organize my life a certain way and start sort of developing yourself? So maybe I can't go to that right now, but if I put this in place and this in place and this in place, I can work towards that. And by the way, this is a creative process. Along the way, you may discover other things that are different or better, or opportunities may present themselves. So, but at least you have some sort of direction. You don't get to the end of the life and say, wow, I've wasted my time. I would encourage you to start thinking along those lines. And I particularly liked, there's a TED Talk, and I think I'm going to add it into the videos here. There's a TED Talk by Christensen where he talks about how you're going to judge your life at the end. And he said when he graduated from Harvard Business School, I'm not going to spoil the whole thing, but when he graduated from Harvard Business School, he was really thrilled and he was looking forward to a great career. And on their 5-year reunion, he said everyone that he went to business school with was doing great. Their careers were on track. They were married to people that were better looking than they were themselves. They, had, all this great promise going on. 10 years in, and people are sort of seem to be unhappy with their lives and not comfortable with where they're going. 15 years in, all of a sudden, you've got a lot of divorces happen, and people are, miserable. Their kids are on the other side of the country being raised by their spouse and a new husband or new wife, and kids won't talk to them. And says, what happens is sometimes you misprioritize. He said, there's easy to look at the short-term goals, and the short-term goals might be to get this report out today because it's short, it's easy. There's a deliverable that pops up right away. Whether or not you've done something well. When you start looking at your relationships with your family or your kids, these are longer-term things. The kids turn out great, and maybe it's because you spent time with them. You're in your 60s and you got this great relationship with your spouse. Maybe it's because you spent time with them, over the years, and you invested in that relationship. So I would just encourage you to think about that. I'm going to put that in the notes as well. That development is not only your career, but development is your life. What about your life are you? And we can sort of get into sort of assessment and planning models, but I think that's what I wanted to do with that. I'm not going to talk about resumes. We'll leave that to Barry for you guys to meet with Barry and talk to her about that. If you're looking at getting a raise or a promotion, I would say be aware of the criterion that you're being judged on. Understand that you should have records so that you go into the meeting prepared. Keep notes of things. Keep a file on your projects that you've been doing, whether it's digital, whether it's paper, I don't care. Keep a file on the projects that you're doing so that you go back when you're having these meetings, you can remember and recall what you did, what progress you made, what contributions you were doing along the way. Understand the market for your job. Understand what people are being paid. Don't just believe Go out and get the data. You can probably find it someplace, even if it's not perfect data. If it's something that you pull down from Glassdoor or something you pull down from any of these sites that will tell you what people make in your job or in your industry. Particularly if you can get industry data from like an association that say this is what people make in your industry. Contextualize that to your part of the country, to your level within that, right? And then if you can have this conversation where you've got the data and you can make your case and you like where you are, great. If you're not, start putting your resume together. Start looking at where else you can go. Okay. Sometimes jobs aren't what people tell you they're going to be, right? They promise you the world, and you get in there and realize it's somewhat different than what they were promising you. That you don't have the opportunities you were looking for, that you're not building the skills you want to build. So be aware of that, but don't just jump from the frying pan into the fire. Use this as an opportunity to look and plan and assess and make sure that your next move is a good move and not just a knee-jerk reaction to getting out of what is a currently bad situation. All right, I'm not going to get into grooming and things like that, or etiquette. I think you guys should know that by now, hopefully. All right, so I think that's it for this. I'm going to have some stuff posted in the discussion forum that I want you to take a look at, and I will see you in the next video.